Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here with the first video of 2025, answering 2024's most asked question about the Cold Monk build. And that is, how the heck is your tooltip this big while you're sitting in the hideout? Especially because I'm using like Ice Bite, for example, which doesn't actually provide anything. So this is like 4 support gems worth of damage here. What is going on? What is the trick? And we went through and we took off each individual piece of gear to kind of just figure out where most of the damage is coming from. And I have a whole spreadsheet that's going to show all the numbers here at the end, which we'll show, but just kind of talk about it real quick. Because the things that I noticed for the most part that people are missing is they don't have good weapon, they don't have good jewels, and then they're just not high enough level to get all of the stuff on the passive tree. Now, if you're looking for a good weapon, one of my most recent videos here covers that for you and how to find and identify a good weapon. It is this one right here, the Endgame Warstaff's shopping tool. In there, I have a little tool that you can go and grab that will help you figure out if a weapon is an upgrade for you and how much of an upgrade it will be. Go and make yourself a copy of that today. It'll help you out quite a bit. But as we can see here, so the Warstaff I'm using right here is really stinking nice. And if I just put on a just completely plain white base here, our damage is going from 319 all the way down to 62,793, which means that about 80% damage loss there if I take off my weapon and just put on a plain one. You can try this on yourself to see like how much damage just an expert crescent quarterstaff would give you. That is a really big chunk of damage there. Now, most of the time I am not running around with my full DPS setup here. And in fact, I'm using like mostly Magic Find these days because I don't really feel like I need all of the damage. However, this is like my I want to murderize the boss or do some sort of difficult content type of gear. So we can go over this real quick. So on rings here, the things that are giving me a lot of damage is really just the flat cold and percentage cold. And the percentage cold, I believe, is more damage than the flat, simply because it's just a lot of damage. And a lot of people were like, oh, ingenuity, you have an insane, like very, very expensive ingenuity here, 84% increase. This must be giving you a lot of damage. And realistically, it is not. I believe that this belt is giving me around almost 14% damage increase. And so this is not as big of a deal as probably just getting better rings would here be. So my worst ring is giving me 14%, and then the better one is giving me 17%. You can see here, let's put a different ring on here. This ring here is giving me about 17%, whereas the other ring here is dropping me down to 274, which is about 14% damage loss. And so having good rings with good prefixes of cold damage and increased cold damage is going to be a lot more important than getting yourself an ingenuity belt, and it's probably going to save you quite a bit of money as well. Likewise, also going and getting yourself support gems on your Ice Strike, and most importantly, giving yourself quality on your Ice Strike is probably a lot of damage too. That more attack speed is like 10% more damage. We kind of go down through the supports here, but you know, Ice Bite doesn't give me any damage. Giving yourself cold infusion is about a 16% damage loss here. Taking off primal armament would be like 19% damage loss. Concentrated effect would be 28.5%, and then martial tempo would be another 20%. And this is kind of why I prioritize these kind of left to right here. So yeah, there's pretty much the support gems here. Now, one of the things that I think is really quite important that a lot of people are missing right now is jewels specifically. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the one last thing here that's giving me a little bit of damage. Is on my helmet here, we are getting, or we're talking about amulet as well. My hat does have critical strike chance on it, which does give me a little bit of damage. This is increasing my critical strike chance up to 56% from 52%. Which doesn't really sound all that big of a deal, but that actually is pretty big. That helmet is basically like a 5% damage increase just for one modifier on it, which is pretty cool. Amulet, pretty much we now are using storm charged, and there's not really any other damage on this for now. We potentially get increased critical strike here as well, which would be pretty nice. And if we replace this, we just go down to 308. So that storm charge alone is pretty much giving me another like 3.5%. So I think realistically, if you are looking to get something that is like a defensive node here, as opposed to using storm charged, you could do something like that as well. It's probably not going to be all that big of a deal. Now, let's talk about jewels real quick. And this is something that I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on. And the first one here is one that I've kind of avoided talking about in most of my videos, and it is a time lost jewel. And time lost jewels, the reason I've avoided mentioning about this is because time lost jewels currently cannot be searched on the marketplace. And so in order to find something like this, you pretty much just have to go and search for time lost emerald, and then set the price to be like, I don't know, 10 exalts or something, and then just look through all 100 of the ones that are there. If you find something that is like 3 mod or even like 4 mod, yay. Otherwise, you change the price and go look at the next 100. It is like the worst experience possible. And I don't even think that this one is really perfect per se, but it does provide a lot of damage for me. So it makes it so each small passive is giving me 2% increased elemental damage. It's making it so that notable passive skills and radius give me 10% critical strike damage. Notable passives are also giving me 1% increased attack speed. And so these aren't even like perfect rolls or anything. And then we also get 5% increased magnitude of shock you inflict. And so, surprisingly, it would take us from 319 here to 291, which is pretty nice. And I believe that that is about a 8% damage loss if I take this out. Spoiler, the other jewels are going to be like at maximum 6%, which is pretty ridiculous. So my next jewels are all pretty similar. They have evasion, critical hit for attacks, attack speed, and elemental damage. And this one's going to drop me down to 300. This one over here is, pretty much the same thing. It's going to drop me down to 302. It's not as good because the elemental damage is not as high here. This one over here is giving me a little bit of strength, melee damage, elemental damage, and rage on melee hit, which is pretty important for keeping your rage going because I only have rage on palm and on bell. So having it on the ruby here allows me to be close to 30% or 30 rage all of the time. And this drops me down to 305. So this is really not that bad, even though we're only getting strength and the 2 mods there. And it's kind of helping me like get some of my strength requirements. The next jewel over here is going to be giving me evasion, critical hit chance, damage, and attack speed. So we can see the rolls here are all pretty darn high, except for the attack speed. And this drops us down to 299, which makes this the second best jewel that we have. But this is pretty much the exact same jewel as this jewel and this jewel, just with better rolls. So finding these weren't really all that hard. And I don't know if the evasion is actually really all that big of a deal. Right now we drop down a little bit. Now, some other stuff here that might be kind of important is we talk a little bit about the ascendancy points. And we're doing this particular setup right now. I have dropped and protect me from harm from the build, mostly to kind of test this out because armor doesn't really seem to be all that good. But these like additional nodes here that give extra cold and extra lightning really does help with the twin herald like cascade damage type of thing. I have noticed that since I took this off though, I am dying a little bit more. So even though armor is not really all that great, it's kind of good in some way. That said though, having like passive points here can massively help out the damage. So if I go over here and I go to refund my passives, we're at 319. And if I just cut out just these points here, you can see that we go down to like 272, which is a pretty big drop. That's like probably like a 14% drop there. So even just having a few more passive points and leveling up a little bit more, like right now we are level 96, probably forever here at this point. I don't think that we're going to probably level again, but even like taking a point out of here, where we just have like crit damage bonus and elemental damage, that's going to drop me down another like 9,000 DPS, which is just pretty massive. Like we lose quite a bit of damage from here. If we were to like lose these points here, we go down to like 287. So if you're like level 70 or 80 and you're kind of like wondering how the heck am I going to get my damage higher, there's just a lot of damage that is potential on the tree here for sure. And kind of just give you like a quick overview of kind of what everything looks like here. This is kind of like a rough and tumble, like my total DPS is here. And this is how much the damage is if I remove whatever the item is. So you can see like what the delta is. So I lose like 80% of my damage with like a plain Jane weapon. The ring is either 14 or 17%. The amulet is only giving me 3%. So I could probably switch out to a different anointment. My gloves right now aren't giving me anything. My hat is giving me a little bit from the crit. The belt is giving me about 14%. My boots don't give me any damage. And then all of the jewels there. And then same thing with the links. Now, one thing that a lot of people have been asking about is, can you fit Hand of Wisdom in action into this build? And yeah, absolutely. You can definitely put Hand of Wisdom in action in this build. This gives us attack speed per dexterity, 3% per 25 dexterity. So we're going to get like what, 12% attack speed. And we have like, I don't know how much intelligence we have at the end of the day here, about almost 16 or 160. So 16 stacks of this, which is like 160 flat lightning damage. And this does increase the damage quite significantly. However, there's kind of two caveats. I feel like a lot of the DPS here is coming from the attack speed. You can kind of see how quickly we are attacking with this particular glove on. And while that's pretty nice, I kind of feel like getting too much attack speed doesn't actually help our end game bossing situation. Because for the most part, the bells just blasting out. And you have to remember that each of these hits like 25 times. And so each of these isn't really affected too much by our attack speed. Like we can get them back faster, obviously, but it's not really going to give us too much damage to give a whole bunch of attack speed to that. And like you can see, it goes up like to 21,000 from 18,000 and 24 to 27. So having a little bit more flat lightning will definitely help you. However, these gloves are pretty darn expensive, and I feel like you really want to be leaning into stat stacking to make these work. And these aren't going to have all of the fun things that I like to have in my gloves, like leech, or mana leech, life leech, or mana on kill, or resistances, or life. Just good stuff to have. And so this doesn't feel, I think, as good as you would expect, especially just because like the attack speed can be quite a lot on the mana. Lastly, we can talk about rarity stuff. So I've actually kind of moved most of my like mapping scenario into being like full rarity. And so like we just have a lot of rarity in our normal setup here. And so as you can see, rarity on your like on death effect here, which I have currently nothing. But if we switch out our hat here, you can see we get 66 rarity from our hat. And really you just want to get like rarity everywhere. And rarity can be both a prefix and a suffix on a lot of stuff. And so like as you're kind of moving into the end game, you get stuff like this that has, evasion, rarity, stat, res. My gloves here, I think the Orcs are actually really kind of underrated. These can give you up to 50% increased rarity. You can socket, if you get lucky, 2 of the rarity runes in there. So these could be like 70% increased rarity. Gloves, which is pretty ridiculous. And the lose 2 life on kill doesn't really affect us because we should be using cannibalism, which gives us 4% of life recovered on kill. So we're just getting half of that instead. And our rarities kind of really stacks up here pretty darn quickly. As you can see here, we have like a ring that gives us 54% rarity, but in reality, that's about 99% with my ingenuity belt. And then the other ring here is taking us up almost another 99% as well, which is just a lot of damage. Amulet as well is a really great spot to find rarity because there is a rarity base, just like there's rarity base for rings that I don't actually use. But you can also get, more rarity on this. And so right now we're popped all the way up to 381%. And I could still go out and like find a rarity pair of boots. I don't think I'm really gonna be able to replace my body armor here with a rarity piece or anything like that. And we are using the golden charm, which I think is just fine. This is kind of like what your like end game farming should look like for the most part. And you can like get quite a bit of rarity without like necessarily breaking the bank too much. Now note, this does feel like I spent quite a bit and I'm not necessarily sure that I'm like truly getting a whole bunch more back. And I kind of like hope that when GGG comes back, they're going to be nerfing rarity. So we'll have to see kind of how that plays out. Now I did mention real quick that I was going to go back to talking about and protect me from harm. Kind of rambling at this point, but talking about the armor formula is a little bit weird in PoE2. So in PoE1, you might be familiar with this chart. Basically, you have your incoming hit here on the vertical, with armor that you actually have on the right. And so armor will basically reduce the damage of incoming hits depending on how big they are. So if I get hit for like 1 trillion damage, even though my like sheet might say I reduce damage by 70%, it's not going to reduce it by 70%. The bigger the hit is, the more damage that's going to go through the armor. And I went through and I figured out what the formula is here of like how much is now a lethal hit for me due to my health, my energy shield, and my effective armor, or my effective armor that I have on the sheet. And so with Protect Me from Harm, it looked like originally we were getting 34% effective health boost from this. However, people have done a little bit of research and stuff, and it appears that the formula is even worse than it was in PoE2 or PoE1. And so we're only getting about a 16% effective health boost from armor for like the biggest possible hits. Now, if you're getting hit by multiple little physical hits, it's going to be a lot better. But I kind of don't feel like this is overly noticeable or really worthwhile. And if anything, what I would consider doing right now is replacing my amulet anointment with subterfuge mask and going getting myself like a hat that has big energy shield, maybe rarity as well, and then just using this. For my actual magic find setup though, I am using Doomsayer still, which just, you know, makes the big pops happen, which is really nice. Anyways, that's a huge ramble about the whole thing. Hopefully this video helped you out in some way. Maybe you learned some stuff about gearing up. Really, at the end of the day, I would say replace your weapon, make it better, use my tool, get better jewels. Your jewels probably bad, and level up. Those things are going to help you out the most, and you know, make sure you add quality to your skills. Have a good one. See you again soon.